speak now.
Thank you very much, Chris, for this kind introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me to this symposium. It's a great pleasure for me to be here, and an honor for me to be here and to give a presentation on what we call in German Leistungslehre. Already had been asked what is the real name of this approach. Is it Leistungslehre or is it Resources, Processes, Outcome approach? And this is at first one of the problems you have when you're a German scientist and you want to publish some of your German thoughts in English. And finally, we made the translation, I think about one year ago when I was a guest researcher at the University of New South Wales in Australia. And there was one colleague working for the School of Marketing there, and she was an Austrian, and she lived for long years in Australia, so she was bilingual. And I invested, I think, $2 Australian for a cappuccino with her, and then we sat together and said, now we have to translate Leistungslehre into English. And after finishing the cappuccino, we resulted with Resources, Processes, Outcome approach. So this is always the end product, so to say, of this discussion. And hopefully, I think you might understand at the end of this presentation why we called it Resources, Processes, Outcome, and not Leistungslehre anymore, because nobody understands Leistungslehre outside of Germany, and perhaps not even in Germany. So the starting point was was this article we published in 1993, and you can also already read this word Leistung in this. It was called Leistungsbündel als Absatzobjekte, meaning that some kind of bundles that are sold on markets. And what is especially important for that is that always the second below said that we try to overcome the dichotomy of products and services or goods and services with this article, and it's still one of the most cited German articles concerned to Google Scholar. And what we we had the same motivation like Steve when he did his presentation and said why he and Bob Lush were thinking about things. Something was going on. And we were discussing on these things in the 80s and the 90s, and we always had the problem to talk about the distinction at that point between what we in German say Sachleistung and the opposite is Dienstleistung, or what in English might be a good or a service. And if you look from the German perspective and use the German words, then something came up into our mind that is, if you talk about the Sachleistung, that means that the distinctive word in this is Sach, that means something is material, or better in English is tangible. And on the other hand, when you talk about a Dienstleistung, then the main word in this is Dienst, and this is a service. And that means that if you go to and look for it, then you can see that these words are referring to different things. Sachleistung is referring to the outcome of something, and Dienst is referring of a process of doing something. So that was more or less the kind of the idea of that was to say, this is not the opposite of the other thing, because something that refers to an outcome cannot be the opposite of something that refers to a process. And that was, so to say, for us the clue of this distinction, or overcoming this distinction, to say there are outcomes that are more or less tangible, and there are processes that have a more or less service character, so to say. And especially what was important for us and was interesting for us was that there are service processes that integrate what in Germany we call the external factors of production, and these are typical service processes, and we have other processes that have not this kind of service character. But if you're looking on this kind of service processes, what is very important for that is that they integrate these factors of production coming from the customer side, and we call this therefore customer integration. And at the end we said Sachleistung, the German word Sachleistung, as tangible outcomes are not the opposite of Dienstleistung as service processes. And at the end, so offerings are always what we said, goods, service, bundles. That led us to a kind of what perhaps became the trademark of this approach, this picture. And where we said, if you look into reality, then you can see that products that are sold on markets, they can be distinguished in two directions. The one is the way in how far the outcome is tangible or not intangible, and the other side you can look on these outcomes in how far they are produced in a more autonomous way, that means that the customer is not integrated, or in a way where the customer is integrated, what we call integrative processes. So that really makes a shift in the discussion, saying we came from this traditional focus where you looked on the outcomes of processes, the goods dominant logic, in a kind of goods dominant logic way, looking on goods that have certain properties or products that have certain properties, and we changed over to a new focus. That means that doesn't matter so much. We have to look on the processes that are behind that, and we have to investigate what is happening in these kind of processes. That led in the next way, so to say, led to this picture, was trying to bring the things together, how the production process at the first round is organized, so to say. And what you see in this picture is, I think for many of you, if you are studying business studies or heard something about services marketing and services management, I think it's very familiar for you that we have always these three stages. First of all, we have to have this, what we call resources. There have to be some resources. In German, we use the word Leistungspotenzial. We have to have some resources as a company first, to be able to serve, to be able to sell a product to the market. Then, and what we have in this is that we already have production. Companies already produce something, but without selling them, but they have to prepare to sell, they have to prepare to do their services, and that is what we call this internal, within the internal operations, we have to have these resources first. Then we have this, then we have these processes, and what is special for all kind of processes, not only for services processes, is that we have this integration of external factors, and typically they were distinguished in the German literature. They say there are people, there are physical objects, and so on. They have to be integrated, especially there are information that have to be integrated into these processes. And at the end, we have a certain outcome, so this outcome typically is what we would call a good service bundle. But what, in the kind of sense, you may see still this input, throughput, output logic behind this picture. But what really is different in our meaning is that we said, no, this is not a meaning of input, throughput, output. But what is more important is that we have, on the one hand, within this area of the Leistungspotenzial, within the resources area, we have what we call autonomous processes. Companies do already produce something to prepare to sell things to the market, to prepare to sell services to the market. This is already production, but it's without the customer. So this is what we call autonomous production. This is speculative. You don't know whether the customer will come and pay for it. Yeah? You may have your fixed cost and nobody will pay for it. And so this is preparative, speculative, and autonomous. But on the other hand, we have this completely different kind of processes which are integrative. That means collaborative. The customer is part of it, becomes a part of these processes, and so we call this integrative or collaborative processes. So we have input, throughput, output two times. We have it here and we have it here, but under completely different conditions. So this was more or less the production point of view of this approach. Then we go further and said, okay, but we are talking about marketing, not about production. So what does this mean for marketing? What does it mean for markets? What does it mean for selling and buying? And then we went over to have this picture, or tried to bring this together in this picture, was a former research assistant of mine, once called the Michael Kleinaltenkamp's half pipe. And what you can see is that in between we have this area we already talked about. Suppliers and customers bringing together resources in a transaction. But the next step is, what is a transaction? What is happening to make this possible? And then we noticed that obviously there's an approach, a theory that may help us, and this is the property rights theory. So we said that this production processes and this integration process, they will not happen if there is not a transaction, meaning that companies and customers and the suppliers are on a market and selling and buying something, are paying money for something or whatever. So we looked at the next stage, we looked at this property rights shell. And we got back really, really far back in the 1930s, and we found a very clear, for us, very clear definition of what a transaction is. Maybe we can talk about this later on. I think there are some differences in understanding in this room about what is a transaction or might be. And this definition is from an old institutional economist, Commons, who in the 1930s said that a transaction is not a transfer of commodities. Yeah, you already see no goods, no services. No? It's not commodities, not certain properties that are important, but the alienation and acquisition between individuals of the rights of property and liberty created by society, which must therefore be negotiated between the parties concerned before labor can produce, or consumers can consume, or commodities be physically exchanged. So he said it's not goods, it's not services, it's property rights. You get something which allows you something to do, and which creates value, I think, in the sense that what Steve said. But this is what is happening on the market. This is what is happening when customers and suppliers come together. And there are some certain types of property rights. I think you might know them, but this is not so important at the moment. These are the rights to use something, to change it, to acquiring the outcomes of it, or to transfer or resale these things, and these are very old concepts coming from Latin law, and they're 2,000 years old, not new, but they're brought together in this. Okay, so if using this, then we can look on what is happening on the market, and we can see there are different forms of contracts that are used on a market to get property rights, or better, to get access to resources. Again, resources, processes, outcomes. We have to get access to resources. And there are different ways to get access to resources. And if you look on this through a property rights perspective, then you can say what Ulrich done in his dissertation, said basically there are four types of getting access to resources. The one is what we can typically call a contract of purchase. We buy something. But there are other things. When we can sign a hiring contract or a leasing contract, then we rent something. Or we can make it on our own, but we need personnel to do so. Or we can make it from somebody else. That means we have contracts for work and labor or contracts of service. What is interesting in this, I think, is that on the one hand, here we are talking about contracts that are relating to resources, and here we have contracts that are relating to processes that are done by resources of others. And that makes it, I think, from my point of view, very, very interesting if you look in modern societies and modern economies, and especially if you look into B2B sector, when you look how today work is organized between companies and how the differentiation of labor is done, then typically in very many cases you don't have this buy option. Because you have different other ways of contracts that are coming together to make things happen in networks, in value chains, and you don't always, we have to really separate from this buy option, and we have all these things together and coming together. So this means, from our point of view, that this contractual view, so to say, where the property rights are behind that, that have some really interesting marketing consequences. Typically, every exchange of property rights leads to new concentrations and or attenuations of property rights. That means renting something means that the owner is still the owner, but you just use it, and you're allowed to use it for a certain time, and so the rights are attenuated. That means he is still the owner, but the owner has to allow you something, and you pay money for that you are allowed to do so, but suddenly two actors have this, use the same resource. They have property rights to use the same resource, and that may cause economic problems. So this is something that is interesting, and typically services transactions like rent make or let make always comprise a limited in time attenuation of property rights. That means a partial non-ownership of resources. So this non-ownership discussion we also have in services marketing, I think, integrates very well in this. On the other hand, you can say there are some goods transactions, so to say, where we buy something, but there we have, in this case, we have the complete transfer of all these four types of property rights. What is also very important concerning the aspects of value creation, I think, is that the value of these new property rights, and that is the basis of property rights theory, the value of these new property rights structures is dependent on the actor's expectations of the future options for action. You get in property rights and you are allowed to do something with this property rights. It allows you to use it, not to use it, to change it, to bring it in another position, whatever. And you buying something or selling something means that every actor has to have a certain expectation of the value of this property rights. We may be wrong. We may have wrong expectations. We can make afterwards, we make an experience, we have completely wrong expectations, but we have the possibility to learn. That's something, the next step. So I think that the thinking of value is integrated in this property rights thinking as the expectations of the actors have something to do with this. And what is also very interesting, and that's what I think really fits well together with SD logic, is that this co-creation aspect is in this because in the cases of attenuation, the economic actors' utility, well-being, and wealth is not only based on their own efforts, because somebody else is also having some property rights of the same resource, and that so their own well-being, wealth, utility is dependent on the effort and expertise and trustworthiness of the other party involved. So from our point of view, attenuation, especially attenuation of property rights, is an important way of getting access to resources, and especially in modern economies, and especially more again in the B2B sector, many things that wouldn't happen if you don't use this kind of attenuation of property rights. It enables many economic activities conceived of as services transactions. It characterizes the joint value creation processes by provider and customer, and is also, from a SD logic point of view, a source of operant resources which relate to the design and management property rights structure, and this is important for marketing, causes agency problems and transaction costs. So this is also, I think, very important. What is also in this, and why are these the degree or the amount of the transaction costs is, I think, very much dependent on the way, on the type of the transaction. And there we also have some distinctions, I think. We have what in literature is called discrete transactions, very, so to say, simple transactions, non-problematic transactions. They are happening in a point of time, short-term transactions, one-time transfer of property rights, more or less no social contact. But on the other hand, and especially the more we have attenuation of property rights, and the more there is at stake, the more we dealing with what is called relational transactions. That means these are transactions that occur in a period of time. They are long-term. They have a repetitive transfer of property rights and so on. They have social contact and so on. And these are transactions that need a different structure, a different governance structure to handle the risks within this transaction that is relating on the way the property rights structure is developed from our point of view. But still, this is again important, this is happening within one transaction, not between several transactions. And that leads to another distinction, and a very important point in our view, is that we, from our point of view, we have to make a distinction between a transaction and a relationship. Would be glad to discuss this with Christian afterwards. And because we have an understanding of the relationship as a series of transactions, which is not happening by accident. There are economic reasons why we have a series of transactions, why customers buy again, why sellers sell again. But these are economic reasons behind that. And this is a different way of relationship than the relational transaction we know also from transaction cost economy. So there may be critical transactions where you have to deal with your partner in a relational way, but once this is finished, it is finished. Then you may think about having a second transaction with the same partner, but then suddenly things of the past have an impact, or even you think about what might be in the future. So there is a relation between different repeat buying or selling decisions, and there is some kind of an economically relevant impact of the history. So this argument of history matters. Yeah? Once you had a first transaction, then you think about, oh, what happened in the past Maybe is it good to have a second transaction with the same partner or the third or whatever? So the history has an impact, history matters. And on the other way, you may be in a situation like that and you think, how many transactions might come? And is it good to be in this relationship with this customer? So also the anticipated future has an impact. So what some people in literature call the shadow of the future. So this means in our view, we have a certain view of what is happening in the resource area, in the combination of resources. We have views, we are using the property rights theory for structuring the transaction problems that are happening there. And in between, and what you can see is the third layer, so to say, in this half pipe, is this has to be organized. This has to be coordinated. So there is a third layer in this approach, and this is information. And this is from what you said, the worst slide from the viewer's point of view. But hopefully I can bring you through it. This is what we already know. Yeah? We have internal resources, we have the processes where the customer is integrated, and we have an outcome. But these processes where the customer is integrated, they are only happening if the customer gives certain information into these processes, saying what he or she wants, how this should be done, when it should be done. So this information coming from the customer is what we call external process information. That also controls the processes. The customer partly controls the process. If the supplier is clever, he or she can learn something about it. So these processes, which are done together with the customer, have the opportunity to gain knowledge. So what also is a part of our concept is knowledge management. That meaning in every single transaction, if the customer is integrated, you have at least the opportunity to learn something. It's not necessary that you learn something, but you have the opportunity to do so. So customer orientation, in the sense we knew it from Naval Slater or Kohli-Jaworski, meaning that we have to acquire this knowledge, we have to process the storages, may be used again for new decisions. Restructure your internal resources, do the process better the next time, and so on. Nevertheless, there is a way of gathering knowledge from the market through market research and everything, but there is, in collaborative transactions, there is a second way, so to say, to gain knowledge together with the customer. The same is, by the way, true for the customer, and he may make his or her own decision, saying, oh, this was a bad transaction, never buy again. So this is, again, the relationship thing that is in this area. So we have a third layer, so to say, which is the information or knowledge layer that coordinates, on the one hand, the property rights layer, the transaction, and the production layer, so to say, where the resources are integrated. And this also brings the opportunity from our point of view to link this, what is happening, so to say, on a micro level, where the transaction is happening with the macro level of the market. And this, I try to bring this in this picture, which also is a little bit full, but yeah, every actor is an owner of property rights. He has some expectations of the future actions of options he can do with this he or she can do with his property rights. But he's uncertain on the future options, because future is uncertain. And he or she has also some knowledge about what has happened in the past. So this is how actors, so to say, go into transactions. Then they have the transaction. They're proceeding these transactions. And these are agreements on the exchange of property rights. You have to hedge the property rights. You have to transfer the property rights. And this causes transaction costs, because we have all these principal agent problems. We have all these screening and signaling problems, issues that are happening in transactions. And the result of these transactions are, on the one hand, the new concentrations or attenuations of property rights on the one hand, but also knowledge about how the transaction worked and how high the transaction cost had been in this transaction. So we have this, on this market process level, we have the intended results, but also unintended results. Something went wrong. We didn't expect it. So when companies, people, customers have at least the possibility, the opportunity to learn something. And this So it all starts again, and this is an ongoing process. This is market process, it's dynamics of marketing that are happening every day from our point of view. So what you hopefully could see is that our approach has basically three bases. The one is typically German, Gutenberg school of thought, so to say. It's the German theory of the firm with the concepts of production, combination, integration of internal and external factors of production, information as a production factor. This relates very much to the, so to say, the old Gutenberg thinking, but with the distinction that we make a difference between autonomous and integrative production, which is not part of Gutenberg's thinking, because he's only talking about mass production, so to say. The company is a production function, and that's it. So we try to integrate these services kind of production processes into this thinking. At the second, we are very much based on old and in new institutional economics with all these constructs of exchange, transaction, attenuation of property rights, uncertainty, transaction costs, institutions which are used to reduce uncertainty, to cope uncertainty, and transaction designs as ways to deal with it. But what is different, I think, is that we really make a clear distinction between single market transactions, so to say, and relationships as a series of transactions. And the third basis is market process theory, the Austrian, so to say, the Austrian way of looking on markets, where knowledge is very important, the dynamics of knowledge are very important, and we have not this homo economicus, we have this homo agens, actors who do something, they have expectation, they act, they precede transactions. And these transactions, from our point of view, are the linking pins between the macro level, the market process, and the micro level, the actors. So coming from this point, I think we have a lot of common with the SD logic view. Exchange in markets does not refer to goods with certain properties. We are not talking about goods and services anymore. And so the goods, services, in plural distinction is dispensable. We don't have 4 Ps. Marketing, from our point of view, does not mean to have communication products and things like that, but marketing comprises, on the one hand, the design of transaction designs, and on the other hand, the design of internal resources and of integrative processes. This is what we have to do to sell something, whatever it is. The utilization processes need to play an important part in the marketing theory. What is done, the value in use, as you would say, I think, and the identities of the actors and their contributions to all processes and resources are very relevant. And comparing this, I think what you've seen is that the property rights theory plays a very important role. And I think from this point of view, I think there are really some differences in the understanding of SD logic and the property rights theory. That is that, well, if I got it right, SD logic says that the unit of exchange is service, and the property rights theory from our point of view would say that the unit of exchange are combinations of property rights and resources. Goods are not, in the thinking of property rights theory, are not distribution mechanisms for services. They are possible parts of a combination of property rights and resources. And resources and actors are not as seen as the SD logic. Resources are resources because they render services. I think the property rights here would say that resources are resources because of the action opportunities they open up to the actors who have this resource, who have access to these resources. And then we compare this if you compare this or use this for a comparison to the foundational premises of the SDL, then we have some differences in the way we look on that. And that means that services, as the SDL says, is the fundamental basis of the exchange. We would say property rights are the fundamental basis of the exchange, and transaction comprise an exchange of property rights. This is different, and this is maybe not different. We have to perhaps discuss on that, because I think always we are talking about a market economy, and in market economy you have to get access to something, and the access is in a market economy done through getting access to resources through property rights. Goods as distribution mechanisms for service provision. Goods or are not goods. It depends on the subject of the contract, which is related to resources or processes. And the contractual arrangement, buy, rent, make, let make, as I showed to you, the outcome of an exchange may be a product, a service, in most cases, bundles. Operant resources are the fundamental source of competitive advantage, I would say, I agree, but in addition, the ability to provide transaction designs which are suitable for the exchange of property rights, which is to be executed. FP6, the customer is always a co-creative value. We would say the service, in service transaction, the customer is always co-creative value. As an owner of goods, the customer creates the value on its own. This is, I think, very have a difference in thinking that I think ownership is different to not ownership. And creation of value is really different if you're the owner of something or not. It doesn't depend whether it's a consumer or a company, a B2B or B2C. Enterprise cannot deliver value, but only offer value proposition. We agree by providing exchange of property rights. We would add to that. All economic and social actors are resource integrators, yes, and market transactions lead to new forms of resource integration. We would also add at this sense. And at the end, we are totally together. Value is always uniquely and phenomenologically determined by the beneficiary. Thank you very much.